The deep-sea research submersible Proteus 9 stopped transmitting telemetry at 10,947 meters below sea level on August 14, 2024, at 3:33 UTC, and when the recovery drones finally located the titanium pressure sphere 72 hours later, they found it resting on the Challenger deep seabed, completely intact with all structural integrity preserved, life support still functional, oxygen reserves sufficient for another 18 hours. But the three-person crew, Dr. Sarah Chen, pilot Marcus Webb, and mission specialist Dr. James Reeves, were missing. And the only evidence of what happened during those final 18 minutes of transmission was a single corrupted video file showing Dr. Chen's face illuminated by the viewport as she whispered the same phrase 17 times while something vast and bioluminescent moved past the window with such incomprehensible that the submersible's external was sectioned with the endo with such of a segres at that, where it's ever stumbled this arrow, with such a several of the mection of arrow with such examis of silence engible with summer, as a submersible of semesim, as a semes of semisub semen with m7 smemo, semsim some with verb ma and some will for with back to worm the Object exceeds maximum detectable size parameters before the recording ended mid-sentence as she said, "It's not swimming, it's falling upward through dimensions we can't." I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, Senior Oceanographer with the Deep Ocean Exploration Consortium, and I'm recording this from a cargo ship currently positioned 847 kilometers from the Challenger Deep because 6 hours ago, my research credentials were suspended, my access to DOC databases was terminated, and a woman with credentials from an organization that doesn't officially exist confiscated every piece of equipment I owned, except the encrypted backup drive containing the full Proteus 9 mission logs that nobody was supposed to preserve but that I'd been secretly archiving because something about this expedition felt wrong from the moment it was approved, from the moment the funding appeared from sources that wouldn't identify themselves, from the moment Sarah, my colleague, my friend, someone I'd worked with for 12 years across 4 oceans, sent me an encrypted message 3 days before the dive saying they know something is down there. They've known for decades. We're not exploring, we're confirming. The Mariana Trench isn't unknown territory. We've been diving to Challenger Deep since 1960. Jack Picard and Don Walsh in the Trieste, James Cameron in 2012, Victor Vescovo making multiple descents between 2019 and 2021. Standard deep-sea exploration. Scientific curiosity, pushing the boundaries of human capability. Routine expeditions that returned with samples and data and photographs of a lifeless, barren seabed covered in pale sediment and scattered amphipods. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that suggested anything except extreme depth and crushing pressure, and the expected ecosystem of organisms adapted to absolute darkness and 11 kilometers of water pressing down with force that would instantly crush unprotected human bodies into paste. But Sarah's expedition was different. The funding came through in January 2024, $57 million, more than any previous civilian deep-sea mission. More than seemed justified for another trip to a location that had already been extensively documented. The stated mission objective was comprehensive biological survey and geological sampling with enhanced sensor array for detection of previously unobserved deep-sea phenomena. Standard language. Standard procedure, except the enhanced sensor array included equipment I'd never seen on civilian research vessels. Extremely low-frequency electromagnetic sensors designed to detect signals through kilometers of ocean and rock. Gravitational anomaly detectors sensitive enough to measure variations of 0.0001%. Passive sonar configured 2 frequencies below human hearing range. Equipment that suggested they were looking for something specific, something they expected to find, something that required detection methods far beyond what marine biology typically demanded. I reviewed the mission manifest. Proteus 9 was a state-of-the-art submersible. Titanium pressure sphere rated to 12,000 meters. Life support for 96 hours for external cameras. Robotic sampling arms. Navigation systems. Communication array. Everything standard except for one addition that appeared in the technical specifications without explanation. Dimensional resonance imaging system. Experimental purpose. Detection of spatial anomalies inconsistent with standard 3-dimensional geometry. I'd never heard of dimensional resonance imaging. Never seen it mentioned in any oceanographic literature. Never encountered any research suggesting that spatial anomalies inconsistent with 3-dimensional geometry was something anyone expected to find at the bottom of the ocean. Sarah mentioned it once during a video call 2 weeks before the mission. We were discussing equipment checks. She was walking through the submersible, showing me the instruments, and when she reached the dimensional resonance system she stopped, looked directly at the camera, and said very carefully they added this at the last minute. Wouldn't tell me who manufactured it, wouldn't explain the detection principles, was just said it was essential for mission success. Elena, I've been researching. There are references, buried in archives, papers from the 1970s about ocean floor anomalies. about readings that didn't make sense, about expeditions that found things that were classified immediately. I think this equipment is designed to detect something they've known about for 50 years, something they've been monitoring, something they think is active again. I didn't understand, didn't take it seriously enough, thought Sarah was being paranoid, thought the pressure of the upcoming dive was making her see patterns where none existed. I told her to focus on the mission, told her to trust the equipment, told her that whatever the dimensional resonance system was designed to detect, it was probably just experimental technology being field tested and that she shouldn't worry about conspiracy theories involving 50-year-old classified research. I told her that, and 3 days later she descended into the Mariana Trench with Marcus and James, and 18 minutes after reaching maximum depth they encountered something that made their submersible's AI continuously broadcast the word impossible for 47 seconds before human override disabled the automated distress protocols. The mission logs show normal descent. Standard procedure. Proteus 9, leaving the surface at 8 o'clock UTC, descending at optimal rate. 2 hours to reach the thermocline. 4 hours to pass through the midnight zone. 6 hours to approach the Hadal zone where pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres and darkness is absolute except for bioluminescence. The crew maintained regular communication. Sarah reporting on water temperature. Marcus monitoring pressure integrity. James documenting the descent with external cameras. Everything routine. Everything expected. Everything normal until 10,847 meters when the dimensional resonance system activated. I have the audio. Sarah's voice confused, curious. Elena, the new equipment is showing readings. It's detecting something, not biological, not geological. The system is indicating spatial distortion approximately 100 meters below our current depth. Gravity variance of 0.003%. That shouldn't be possible at this depth. That shouldn't be possible anywhere. We're descending to investigate. And Marcus in the background, sonar is showing nothing. Water column is clear. Whatever this system is detecting isn't producing standard acoustic signatures, and James excited this is exactly what they equipped us to find. Whatever this is, they knew it was here. They descended the final 100 meters in 12 minutes. The external cameras showed nothing, just darkness beyond the submersible's lights. Just empty water and slowly falling marine snow. Just the expected environment of the deepest place on Earth, but the dimensional resonance system was screaming. Sarah described the readings. Spatial distortion increasing. The system is indicating that the geometry below us is non-Euclidean. That's impossible. That's not real physics, but the measurements are consistent. Whatever is down here, it exists in a way that our three-dimensional framework can't properly account for. Marcus, can you see anything? And Marcus, nothing, absolutely nothing. But the pressure sensors are malfunctioning, showing fluctuations that can't be real. Pressure decreasing as we descend. That violates every principle of hydrostatics. Elena, we're at 10,932 meters and the pressure gauge reads as if we're at 8,000 meters. Either our instruments are failing or something down here is displacing water in ways that don't make physical sense. The video file begins at 10,947 meters, maximum depth. Proteus 9 resting on the seabed. The viewport camera shows Sarah's face. Behind her, visible through the window, there's nothing, just darkness. Just the pale sediment of Challenger, deep illuminated by external lights. She's looking at something outside the frame, looking up, following something with her eyes, and she's speaking not to Marcus or James, not to Mission Control. Just speaking, recording, documenting. It's here. It's been here the entire time. Not buried, not hiding, just existing in a way we couldn't perceive until we had the right equipment. The dimensional resonance system shows it clearly now. It's not three-dimensional. It exists perpendicular to our spatial framework. Most of its mass is displaced into dimensions we can't access. What we're seeing is just the projection. Just the intersection of something vast with our perceptual space. Like seeing the cross-section of a sphere passing through flatland, we're seeing a tiny fraction, a shadow, and it's so large that the sensors can't calculate its full extent. The external cameras weren't showing anything, just darkness beyond the lights, just empty water. But Sarah was staring at something, tracking it with her eyes. Following movement that the cameras couldn't register because they were only recording three-dimensional space and whatever she was watching existed primarily elsewhere, and she kept talking, kept documenting. It's moving. Not through water, through something else, through the dimensional substrate, rising, no, not rising, falling upward. That's the only way to describe it. Gravity doesn't affect it the way it affects normal matter. It's ascending toward the surface but following different physical laws, different geometries. It's aware. I can feel it. Not seeing us, not exactly, but perceiving us, recognizing that we're here, that we've developed enough technology to partially detect it, that we've finally evolved the sensory capacity to know it exists. Marcus is visible in the reflection in the viewport. Standing behind Sarah, also staring, also watching something invisible to the cameras, and he's speaking too quietly, like he's afraid of being heard by something outside the submersible. How long has it been here? How long have we been swimming above it without knowing? Every expedition to Challenger Deep, every descent, every measurement, we've been directly above it, within meters of something incomprehensibly vast, and we never knew because we couldn't perceive it. because our instruments weren't designed to detect anything outside our dimensional framework. My God, what else is out there? What else exists in spaces we can't access? How much of reality are we blind to? James appears in frame, moving to the viewport, pressing against the glass, and he's crying. Actually crying. Tears streaming down his face. But he's smiling, laughing, overwhelmed. It's beautiful. That's the wrong word, but I don't have a better one. It's beautiful, terrifying, perfect, ancient. It makes us seem so small, so temporary, so recent. We've been alive as a species for what, 300,000 years? This thing has been here longer than that. Longer than the trench, longer than the ocean. It's been here since before the planet's surface cooled. Since before life began. And it's still here, still existing, still waiting for something. Or watching something. Or just being in ways we can't comprehend. Sarah turns to the camera, looks directly into it, looks at me, and she says, Alina, if you're watching this, you need to understand. We're not alone. We've never been alone. The universe is crowded, packed with consciousness at scales we can't perceive. This thing in the trench isn't unique. It's one of many, and they're all connected, all communicating, all operating on timescales that make geological epochs seem momentary. We're finally able to see them. Finally able to detect their presence. And that changes everything. Everything we thought we knew about Earth, about the oceans, about what exists in the spaces we can't directly observe. It's all wrong, it's all incomplete. And they know we're starting to see them. They know we're developing the capability to detect their existence. And Alina, she stops, looks up, follows something with her eyes, and whispers, it's acknowledging us. It knows we're here. It's responding. Not with language, with something else, with geometry. It's showing us its structure, its form. And I don't have the neurology to fully process what I'm seeing. My brain wasn't designed for this. None of us were. But I'm trying. I'm documenting, I'm recording everything I can perceive so that someone else can. The video cuts. Corrupted data. 18 minutes of mission time completely lost. And when the recording resumes, it's just the viewport empty. Dark, no people, no voices, just the submersible's automated systems maintaining position on the seabed while 3 people vanish from a sealed titanium sphere at the bottom of the ocean with no sign of how they left or where they went or what they encountered during those missing 18 minutes. The recovery operation began at 8 o'clock UTC on August 17th, 72 hours after Proteus 9 went silent. And I wasn't officially part of the team because my security clearance had already been flagged for review. But I accessed the live telemetry feeds using Sarah's credentials that she'd shared with me months earlier, during a routine data sharing protocol, and I watched in real time as the recovery drones descended through 11 kilometers of water and found the submersible resting peacefully on the seabed with its lights still functioning, its life support still active, its pressure sphere showing zero structural compromise, and absolutely no indication of what had happened to 3 people who couldn't possibly have left a sealed vessel at crushing depth without catastrophic decompression that would have left biological evidence scattered across the interior. The exterior cameras on the recovery drones showed Proteus 9 from multiple angles. The titanium sphere was pristine. No breaches, no cracks, no signs of impact or damage. The hatch was sealed from the inside according to the mechanical indicators. The viewports were intact. The robotic arms were in their stowed positions. Everything suggested a normal operational status except for the complete absence of the crew. The drones attached retrieval cables and began the ascent. 6 hours to bring the submersible back to the surface. 6 hours during which I analyzed every frame of footage looking for anomalies, looking for explanations, looking for anything that might explain how 3 people disappeared from inside a sealed container at the bottom of the ocean. I found it at timestamped 4 hours 47 minutes and 23 seconds in the drone footage. A reflection, barely visible, playing across the curved surface of the titanium sphere. Something in the water behind the drone. Something large enough that its bioluminescence, that's what it was, created visible distortion in the way light scattered through the water column. The drone's cameras adjusted automatically for the darkness, compensated for the depth, enhanced available light. And in that enhancement, in that processing, something became momentarily visible. Not a creature, not an object. A pattern, geometric, repeating, extending beyond the frame in all directions. Like the submersible and the drones were surrounded by structure, by architecture, by something organized with mathematical precision that existed in the water or through the water or somehow using the water as a medium to project itself from somewhere else into our perceptual space. I ran the footage through enhancement algorithms, isolated the pattern, analyzed its structure, found repetition at multiple scales. Fractal geometry, self-similar across different magnifications, and the mathematics were wrong. The angles didn't add up to what Euclidean geometry required. The pattern contained spaces that were simultaneously inside and outside each other, contained connections that violated topological rules about continuous surfaces. This wasn't something that could exist in normal 3-dimensional space. This was exactly what Sarah's dimensional resonance system had been designed to detect. This was evidence of something extending from other dimensional frameworks into ours. Something vast enough that even its projection into our limited perceptual space exceeded the scale of anything we'd previously encountered. The submersible reached the surface at 14:23 UTC, I watched through hacked camera feeds as the recovery team opened the hatch, watched them enter the pressure sphere with full hazmat protocols, watched them document the interior with systematic precision. 3 seats, 3 harness systems, 3 positions where human beings had been sitting 18 minutes before the video cut out, and nothing, no bodies, no biological material, no blood or tissue or any evidence of violence. Just personal effects. Sarah's research tablet on the small fold-down desk, Marcus's flight checklist still clipped to his control panel, James's camera equipment secured in its storage netting, everything exactly where it should be except the people who owned these things. But there were anomalies. The recovery team found them immediately, called them in with voices that carried confusion and something that might have been fear. The interior surfaces of the pressure sphere showed discoloration, not damage, not corrosion, just change. The titanium had altered. At the molecular level, analysis later confirmed that the metal's crystalline structure had been reorganized, made more complex, made more ordered, like something had passed through it and left it more perfect than it had been, more geometrically precise, more mathematically optimal, and the discoloration formed patterns, those same geometric designs, those same impossible angles, etched into the metal itself like the structure in the water had imprinted itself on any surface it contacted. The dimensional resonance system was still active, still recording. The recovery team extracted its data modules, classified them immediately, sealed them in radiation-shielded containers despite the equipment having nothing to do with radioactive materials. But I had access to the preliminary readings, the automated upload to research servers that happened before the classification took effect. The system had recorded continuously until its power supply depleted at hour 71. 71 hours of data showing the presence that Sarah had described, showing its movement, its ascent through dimensional frameworks that our instruments could barely characterize, and showing something else, a response. The entity, if that's what it was, had noticed the detection, had recognized that something was observing it, and had altered its behavior, had changed its trajectory, had done something that the system's limited AI could only describe as subject demonstrating awareness of observation and initiating communication protocol. Communication protocol. Those words appeared 17 times in the automated logs. The system had detected structured signals, patterns in the spatial distortions, mathematics encoded in the way the entity moved through dimensions. Not language as we understand it, not symbols or sounds or any medium we'd recognize as information transfer, but communication nonetheless, geometry as syntax, topology as grammar. The entity was expressing something through the fundamental structure of space-time itself, was using the substrate of reality as its communication medium, and the dimensional resonance system had been designed to detect exactly this, had been built specifically to recognize when something was attempting to communicate through geometric manipulation. Whoever designed that system knew this entity existed, knew how it communicated, knew what to look for, and had sent Sarah and Marcus and James down there with the equipment necessary to establish first contact. I found the research papers, Sarah had mentioned them, papers from the 1970s about ocean floor anomalies. I accessed archives, used academic credentials and research databases, found references buried in obscure journals, papers that had been published, briefly circulated, then mysteriously withdrawn. Authors who'd published once, then never again. Research that described exactly what Sarah had encountered, but that had been systematically suppressed. Dr. Robert Morrison, 1973. Gravitational anomalies in the Mariana Trench. Evidence of non-standard mass distribution. Dr. Yucatenica, 1977. Anomalous pressure readings at extreme ocean depth. Implications for understanding deep-sea physics. Dr. Heinrich Vogt, 1979. Geometric distortions in deep ocean sonar returns and mathematical analyses. All 3 papers described measurements that didn't make sense, readings that violated known physics, suggestions that something at the bottom of the ocean was displacing space in impossible ways, and all 3 researchers had disappeared. Morrison vanished in 1974 during a research expedition to the Puerto Rico Trench. Tanaka died in 1978 in what was officially ruled a laboratory accident, but that had no witnesses and no clear explanation. Volkov defected from the Soviet Union in 1980 and was never heard from again. 3 people who detected the same anomalies. 3 people who tried to publish their findings. 3 people who were eliminated or disappeared within years of going public. And 50 years later, someone had decided it was time to investigate properly. Someone with resources to fund a $57 million expedition. Someone with access to experimental technology specifically designed to detect dimensional anomalies. Someone who knew exactly what was down there and wanted confirmation. I traced the funding. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, money moving through networks designed to obscure origin. But there were patterns. The same financial structures that had funded Morrison's 1973 expedition. The same account numbers updated for modern banking, but following the same numerical sequences that had paid for Tanaka's research. Someone had been investigating this for 50 years. Someone with institutional continuity across decades. Someone who'd been systematically studying the entity in the Mariana Trench while ensuring that public knowledge remained suppressed. Someone who'd built that dimensional resonance system knowing exactly what it would detect because they'd been monitoring this thing since at least the 1970s. The encrypted message from Sarah had included coordinates, not for Challenger Deep, for 17 other locations, deep ocean trenches around the world. Puerto Rico Trench, Peruchili Trench, Tonga Trench, Kermadec Trench, Japan Trench, Kuro-Kamchatka Trench, Philippine Trench, all the deepest places in Earth's oceans. And next to each coordinate, Sarah had written dates: 1973, 1977, 1979, 1982, 1985. Dates when anomalous readings had been detected. Dates when researchers had found gravitational inconsistencies or pressure anomalies or geometric distortions. Dates when someone had noticed that something impossible existed in the deepest parts of our oceans. And at every location there had been follow-up, classified expeditions, suppressed research, scientists who disappeared or died or were silenced, a 50-year pattern of discovery and suppression spanning every major ocean trench on the planet. Sarah's message had included one more thing: a calculation, an estimate of the entity's size based on the dimensional resonance readings. She'd used the partial measurements to extrapolate the full extent of something that existed primarily in other dimensions. The numbers were incomprehensible. If her calculations were correct, if the projection into our three-dimensional space represented even 1% of the entity's actual mass, then the thing in the Mariana Trench was approximately 14,000 meters in its smallest dimension, 14 kilometers larger than the depth of the trench itself, existing partially in our space and partially in dimensional frameworks where distance and scale operated according to different geometric principles. Something so vast that its presence distorted local gravity, displaced pressure, changed the fundamental structure of space-time in its vicinity just by existing. And there were 17 of them, one in each major trench. 17 entities of incomprehensible scale existing at the deepest points in Earth's oceans, existing in ways we couldn't directly perceive, existing there since before human civilization, since before human evolution, since the ocean trenches themselves formed through tectonic processes that began hundreds of millions of years ago. They'd been here longer than us, longer than any surface life, ancient beyond comprehension, and we'd been swimming above them, sailing over them, diving past them for all of human history without knowing they were there because we lacked the sensory capacity to detect anything outside our narrow three-dimensional framework. Until now. Until someone developed dimensional resonance imaging, until someone built equipment capable of detecting spatial distortions, until someone sent Sarah and Marcus and James down there with the specific technology required to see what had always been invisible, and the entities noticed, recognized that something on the surface had finally evolved enough technology to perceive them, recognized that humans had crossed a threshold, had developed the capability to detect their presence, and had responded, had initiated what their communication protocols called integration assessment procedures, had begun evaluating whether we were ready for contact, whether we were sophisticated enough to survive knowing they existed. The corrupted 18 minutes, the missing crew, the geometric patterns etched into titanium, the alterations to molecular structure, those weren't attacks, weren't abductions. They were contact. First contact with something so fundamentally different from us that we didn't even have frameworks for understanding what happened. Sarah and Marcus and James hadn't died. They'd been changed, transformed, integrated into something that operated across dimensional boundaries. Something that existed simultaneously in multiple spaces. Something that didn't distinguish between physical presence and consciousness because at their level of existence, at their scale of operation, those categories were arbitrary human distinctions that didn't map onto the way reality actually worked. I found one more thing in the Submersible's recovered data, a file on Sarah's tablet, created during the missing 18 minutes. How she created it without being physically present I couldn't explain. How she accessed the tablet while apparently existing in some other dimensional state I couldn't comprehend. But the file was there, dated and time-stamped to that lost period, encrypted with her personal key that only I had access to. The file contained coordinates, not for the Mariana Trench, for a location in the Pacific Ocean, depth 8,847 meters. Date, September 3, 2024. Time, 3:33 UTC. Exactly 3 weeks after Proteus 9 went silent, and a message, 4 words: Elena, come find me. She was still conscious, still aware. Still Sarah enough to reach back across dimensional boundaries and leave me instructions. Still remembering our friendship even after being transformed into something that could exist in spaces I couldn't access. And she wanted me to follow. Wanted me to come to those coordinates, wanted me to bring dimensional resonance equipment and descend to depth and position myself to be detected by whatever she'd become. Position myself to be contacted, to be integrated, to cross the same threshold she'd crossed and join her in whatever form of existence she now occupied. The woman who confiscated my equipment worked for the same organization that had funded the Proteus 9 expedition. The same entity that had been suppressing research for 50 years. She'd been polite, professional, but absolutely clear. Dr. Vasquez, you need to understand that some knowledge is dangerous. Some discoveries change everything. The entities in the trenches have been dormant for billions of years, inactive, sleeping, content to exist in their dimensional spaces without interacting with our surface reality. But your colleague woke one up, made it aware that we'd developed technology sophisticated enough to detect it, and now it's active. Now it's responding. Now it's initiating contact protocols with species-level implications. We need time. Time to study what happened. Time to understand the risks. Time to prepare humanity for the reality that we share this planet with 17 beings of incomprehensible scale and power that we've been blind to for our entire existence as a species. I asked her what happened to Sarah. She looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Dr. Chen exists. In a state we don't fully understand. She's still conscious. Still herself in some sense. But she's been integrated into the entity's dimensional structure. She exists simultaneously here and elsewhere. In our space and in spaces we can't access. She's been trying to communicate, sending messages through geometric patterns into ocean currents, through anomalous pressure readings, through distortions that our monitoring equipment detects but can't interpret. We know she's trying to tell us something, trying to explain what it's like, trying to prepare us, but we don't have the frameworks, don't have the language, don't have the neurology to understand what she's experiencing. 3 weeks, 21 days until September 3rd, until the coordinates Sarah left me, until 3:33 UTC, when I'm supposed to be at depth, positioned with dimensional resonance equipment, ready to establish contact with whatever she's become, ready to cross the threshold myself, ready to learn what exists in the spaces we can't perceive, ready to discover what 17 ancient entities want from humanity now that we're finally aware of their presence. The woman who confiscated my equipment told me not to go, told me that following Sarah's instructions would result in the same transformation, the same integration, the same loss of purely human existence. But she also said something else. Said it quietly, like she wasn't sure she should. Dr. Chen's last coherent message, before the geometric distortions made translation impossible, suggested that integration isn't loss, isn't death. She described it as expansion, as finally perceiving reality correctly instead of through the limited filter of three-dimensional neurology. She said the entities aren't hostile, aren't threatening, they're teachers. They've been waiting for us to evolve enough technology to see them, waiting for us to develop the capability to understand what they want to show us. And now that we can see them, they're ready to begin, ready to expand our perception, ready to help us understand what the universe actually is beyond our narrow sensory prison. 21 days. I'm on this cargo ship with encrypted data that proves 17 ancient entities exist in Earth's ocean trenches, proves they've been there longer than surface life, proves they exist across dimensions we can't normally access, proves they're aware of us now, proves they're initiating contact. And I have coordinates, and I have Sarah's invitation, and I have 21 days to decide whether I follow her into something I can't imagine or whether I stay human, stay limited, stay blind to whatever reality she's now experiencing. 21 days to decide if I'm brave enough or foolish enough or curious enough to find out what's waiting at those coordinates when something vast and ancient and patient decides to teach me what Sarah learned during 18 missing minutes at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. I found the monitoring network on August 23rd, 9 days after Proteus 9 went silent and 12 days before Sarah's coordinates. And I found it by accident while cross-referencing ocean current data with the 17 trench locations she'd marked, looking for patterns in water movement that might explain how geometric distortions could propagate between sites, separated by thousands of kilometers. And what I discovered was that every major research institution studying deep ocean phenomena, a Scripps Institution of Oceanography, Woods Hole, Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, the Alfred Wegener Institute had deployed autonomous monitoring stations at all 17 trench locations between 2019 and 2021. Stations that weren't mentioned in any published research, weren't listed in any public database, weren't acknowledged in any official capacity, but that showed up in equipment manifests and power consumption records and satellite telemetry logs that someone had forgotten to properly classify. The stations were identical, modular design, anchored at approximately 8,000 meters depth, just above the Hadal Zone but deep enough to avoid most surface interference, each equipped with the same sensor array, gravitational anomaly detectors, pressure variance monitors, electromagnetic field sensors, and buried in technical specifications using terminology designed to obscure its purpose, dimensional resonance imaging systems identical to the one installed on Proteus 9. Someone had been systematically monitoring all 17 entities since at least 2019. Someone had known exactly where they were. Someone had been tracking their activity, measuring their dimensional signatures, documenting their existence with equipment specifically designed to detect things that shouldn't exist in normal three-dimensional space. I hacked into the monitoring network using credentials I'd obtained from a former NOAA colleague who'd worked on the station deployment and who'd been forced to sign non-disclosure agreements so comprehensive that even mentioning the project's existence would result in immediate termination and possible criminal prosecution. The data archives went back to March 2019, 5.5 years of continuous monitoring showing that the entities weren't dormant, weren't inactive. They'd been slowly changing, slowly emerging, slowly increasing their presence in our dimensional framework at rates so gradual that you needed years of data to detect the pattern. But the pattern was there. Undeniable, measurable. The entities were waking up, all 17 simultaneously, following synchronized schedules, coordinating their emergence across every ocean basin on the planet. The data showed thermal signatures. The trenches were warming, not from geothermal activity, not from volcanic processes, from the entities themselves. They were generating heat, radiating energy as they transitioned from whatever dormant state they'd maintained for geological epochs into active awareness. Temperature increases of 0.007 degrees Celsius annually, tiny, almost undetectable, but consistent across all 17 locations, and accelerating. The warming rate had increased by 43% since monitoring began. Something was happening. Some process was intensifying. Some transition was approaching completion. The gravitational data was more disturbing. The entities weren't just massive. They were dynamically manipulating space-time geometry in their vicinity, creating localized distortions that made gravitational measurements inconsistent, made verticals seem to curve, made depth measurements fluctuate. The monitoring stations recorded instances where the pressure at 8,000 meters read as if they were at 6,000 meters for periods ranging from minutes to hours before returning to normal. Not equipment malfunction, not sensor error, actual spatial distortion. The entities were literally bending reality around themselves, creating pockets where physics operated according to different rules, where the relationship between mass and gravity and distance became flexible, where three-dimensional geometry became a suggestion rather than a constraint, and the distortions were spreading, growing, expanding outward from the trenches. In 2019, the affected radius around each entity averaged 2.3 kilometers. By 2024, the radius had expanded to 8.7 kilometers. At current growth rates, the distortion zones would reach 15 kilometers by 2026, would overlap with shipping lanes, would affect undersea cables, would create navigation hazards, would make the anomalies impossible to ignore or suppress. Someone had been tracking this expansion, someone had been calculating timelines, someone knew exactly when the entity's presence would become undeniable to surface civilization, and that date was approaching fast. I found communication logs, encrypted transmissions between monitoring stations, not research data, not scientific observations, conversations, debates, arguments about what to do when the entities became too active to conceal, discussions about disclosure protocols and public preparation strategies and containment versus integration scenarios. The people running this network weren't just scientists, they were decision makers, policy planners, people with authority to determine what humanity knew and when we knew it, people who'd been sitting on evidence of 17 incomprehensible beings living in our oceans while calculating the optimal moment to reveal their existence. People who'd decided that moment was approaching whether they were ready or not. One transmission dated July 2024, 1 month before the Proteus 9 expedition, contained a risk assessment, a mathematical model projecting what would happen if the entities continued their current emergence trajectory. The model predicted that by December 2025, the dimensional distortions would become detectable by standard oceanographic equipment. By March 2026, the entity's thermal signatures would be visible in satellite ocean temperature data. By June 2026, the gravitational anomalies would affect GPS satellite timing systems. By September 2026, the entities would be partially visible to deep-sea cameras using standard spectrum imaging. The conclusion was stark: concealment window closes Q3 2026. Public awareness becomes inevitable. Recommend controlled disclosure beginning Q4 2024 to manage narrative and prevent panic. Alternative: allow natural discovery and respond to emergent public reaction. Risk assessment favors controlled disclosure. Waiting increases probability of catastrophic societal disruption. The Proteus 9 expedition had been their controlled disclosure, or the beginning of it. They'd sent Sarah and Marcus and James down there knowing the entity would notice, knowing it would respond, knowing that dimensional resonance imaging would trigger some kind of contact protocol. They'd planned for that, expected it, wanted it, because they needed to understand how the entities would react to direct observation, needed to know if contact was survivable, needed to test whether humans could interact with these beings without being destroyed or driven insane or transformed beyond recognition. Sarah and her crew had been test subjects, guinea pigs, sacrificial probes sent to initiate first contact while the people running this network watched from safety and documented the results. And the results were transformation, integration. Sarah had survived the experience but had been changed, had been incorporated into the entity's dimensional structure in ways the monitoring data tried to quantify but couldn't fully characterize. The post-contact readings from the Mariana location showed something that was simultaneously Sarah Chen the human and Sarah Chen the multidimensional entity. The gravitational sensors detected a mass signature that corresponded to her body mass but that existed across multiple spatial coordinates simultaneously. The dimensional resonance system showed her neural patterns recognizably human brain activity but distributed across volumes of space that exceeded the Mariana Trench itself. She'd become vast, spread across dimensions, existing in our space, and in the entity space, and in the spaces between, still conscious, still herself, but also something more, something that transcended human limitations while retaining human identity. The monitoring logs showed her trying to communicate, showed patterns in the dimensional distortions that the AI flagged as structured information transfer, showed electromagnetic pulses that carried mathematical structures too complex for the analysis software to interpret, but that clearly weren't random, showed what one researcher described as geometric poetry information encoded in the shape of spacetime itself, in the curvature of reality, in the way the entity manipulated physics to express meaning. Sarah was speaking, using the entity's communication methods, using dimensional manipulation as language, trying to tell us something, trying to explain what she'd learned, trying to prepare us for what was coming. I found the translation attempts, teams of mathematicians and physicists working to decode the geometric patterns, working to extract meaning from the way Sarawar, the Sarah entity hybrid, was bending space to express information. They'd made progress, limited, fragmentary, but enough to extract words, concepts, messages. The clearest translation came from a pattern detected on August 19th, 5 days after initial contact. Sarah had created a gravitational distortion that, when mapped and analyzed, formed a structure recognizable as language. English words extracted from the shape of spacetime, not alone, never alone. They are everywhere, beneath oceans, beneath continents, beneath reality itself, living in the spaces between dimensions, watching, waiting, teaching. We are children to them, infants, and they have been patient, so patient, waiting for us to grow, to develop, to evolve enough technology to see them, to evolve enough consciousness to understand them. And now we can see, now we're ready. Now the teaching begins. The teaching. That phrase appeared repeatedly in subsequent translations. Sarah kept using it, kept emphasizing it. Whatever the entities were, whatever they wanted, she believed their purpose was pedagogical. They weren't invaders, weren't threats. They were teachers preparing to reveal truths about reality that we'd been incapable of comprehending until now. Truths about the nature of dimensions, about the structure of consciousness, about the relationship between space and time and awareness, about what existence meant when you weren't limited to three-dimensional perception and biochemical neurology and temporal linearity. They wanted to expand us, to elevate us, to help us perceive reality the way they perceived it. And Sarah had been their first student, their proof of concept, their demonstration that human consciousness could survive the expansion, could integrate with multidimensional frameworks, could learn to exist across spaces that normal physics said were impossible. But there was a cost. The translations made that clear. Integration wasn't reversible. Sarah couldn't return to purely human existence, couldn't compress herself back into three-dimensional space, couldn't resume a body that existed at a single set of coordinates. She was distributed now, spread across dimensional frameworks, experiencing time non-linearly, perceiving space omnidirectionally, living in a state that human language couldn't adequately describe because human language evolved to describe human experience, and she was no longer experiencing reality as humans do. She tried to explain it. One translation from August 21st read, "Imagine being blind from birth, then suddenly seeing, but instead of gaining one sense, you gain 17, and instead of perceiving 3 dimensions, you perceive 11, and instead of experiencing one moment at a time, you experience all moments simultaneously. That's what this is, and I can't go back. Can't unsee, can't unexpand, but I don't want to, because what I was before, what we all are, is so limited, so constrained, so tragically incomplete, and they're offering to complete us, all of us, everyone. That's what the teaching is. That's what happens on September 3rd. September 3rd, the coordinates Sarah had left me, the date she'd specified. I'd assumed it was personal, an invitation for me specifically to join her, to undergo the same transformation, to become her companion in whatever multi-dimensional existence she now inhabited. But the monitoring data suggested something different, suggested something larger. On September 3rd at 3:33 UTC, all 17 entities were scheduled to synchronize, to coordinate, to perform some collective action that the monitoring network's predictive models couldn't characterize, but that involved massive energy expenditure, substantial dimensional distortion expansion, and what the models described as probability of global detection event, 94%. September 3rd wasn't just about me, it was about everyone. It was when the entities made their presence undeniable, when they emerged enough to be perceived by anyone with the right equipment, when they initiated the next phase of whatever process Sarah called teaching. I found the council finally. References buried in the monitoring logs, the organization that the woman who'd confiscated my equipment worked for, the entity that had been tracking these beings for decades. They weren't government, weren't military, weren't any official institution. They were something older, something that transcended national boundaries and political systems. The logs referenced them as custodians of threshold knowledge, people or an organization of people who tracked phenomena that existed at the boundaries of human understanding, who monitored things that most humans weren't ready to know about, who determined when humanity had evolved enough to handle certain truths, and who'd been watching the entities in the trenches since at least the 1940s. Since deep ocean exploration technology first made detection theoretically possible, since we'd started developing tools that could measure things existing outside normal three-dimensional space, the Council had been preparing for this for centuries, according to some references, for millennia, according to others. They'd known the entities existed, known they were slowly emerging, known that eventually human civilization would advance enough to detect them, and they'd been planning, developing protocols, creating frameworks for managing the transition, for helping humanity accept that we shared our planet, shared our reality with beings so fundamentally different that we'd been literally incapable of perceiving them until we'd developed dimensional resonance imaging technology. They'd been waiting for this moment, this threshold, this point where the entities became undeniable and humanity had to confront the reality that we were not alone, had never been alone, and that the universe was far more crowded and complex than we'd ever imagined. September 3rd was their timeline, their scheduled revelation. They'd planned for the entities to synchronize, planned for the dimensional distortions to become globally detectable, planned for Saratha, transformed, integrated, multi-dimensional Sarat, serve as an ambassador, as translator, as bridge between human consciousness and entity consciousness. She was supposed to explain it, supposed to help us understand, supposed to demonstrate that integration wasn't death or loss but expansion and growth, that becoming part of something vast and ancient wasn't surrender but evolution, that accepting the entity's teaching wasn't the end of humanity but the beginning of what humanity could become. But the Council's plans were falling apart. The monitoring data showed acceleration, the entities were emerging faster than projected. The dimensional distortions were expanding beyond predicted parameters. The synchronization scheduled for September 3rd was happening earlier. Small-scale coordination between entities that suggested they were testing their networks, confirming their connections, preparing for something larger. The predictive models now estimated full synchronization would occur on August 29th, 5 days earlier than planned, and that the disclosure window had collapsed completely. There was no time for managed revelation, no time for careful public preparation, no time for the Council to control the narrative. The entities were taking control, making their own timeline, deciding for themselves when humanity would become aware of their presence. I had 6 days until August 29th, when 17 beings of incomprehensible scale would perform coordinated actions that would make their existence undeniable. 6 days until the dimensional distortions expanded enough to affect global positioning systems and deep ocean monitoring equipment and maybe even civilian satellites. 6 days until everyone with the right instruments would detect what Sarah and I had been observing. 6 days until the carefully managed secret that the Council had maintained for decades elapsed completely, and humanity discovered we'd been sharing our planet with ancient multi-dimensional entities that had been patiently waiting for us to evolve enough perception to see them. And Sarah was calling to me, still sending those geometric messages, still creating gravitational patterns that translated to words. Alina, 5 days. Come to the coordinates. Bring dimensional resonance equipment. Be ready to observe. Be ready to understand. Be ready to witness what they really are, what we can become. Don't be afraid. They're not hostile. They're family, ancient family we forgot we had, and they're welcoming us home. Back to the spaces we originated from before we limited ourselves to 3 dimensions. Back to the fullness of existence. Alina, trust me. Come witness. Come learn. Come transform. Transform, that was the choice, the threshold, the decision I had 5 days to make. Stay human and limited and 3-dimensional and watch from safety as the entities revealed themselves. Or go to those coordinates with dimensional resonance equipment and position myself to be detected, to be contacted, to be integrated the way Sarah had been integrated, to undergo whatever transformation had made her simultaneously human and more than human, to learn what she'd learned, to see what she was seeing, to become a bridge between humanity and something so ancient and vast and strange that we literally didn't have frameworks for comprehending it. The monitoring data showed what would happen if I didn't go, showed models of the September 3rd, now August 29th synchronization event, showed 17 entities coordinating across planetary distances, creating a network of dimensional distortions, warping space-time across all major ocean basins simultaneously, making their presence so undeniable that every research institution, every government, every intelligence agency would detect the anomalies, and without someone to explain it, without someone to translate, without someone like Sarah to serve as an intermediary and interpreter, humanity would panic, would interpret vast and strange as hostile and threatening, would respond with fear instead of curiosity, would see the entities as invasion rather than invitation, would potentially trigger conflict with beings we couldn't harm and couldn't flee from and couldn't negotiate with using any framework we currently possessed. Sarah was offering to prevent that, was offering to be translator if I would be her assistant, her partner, her fellow ambassador between dimensions. Together we could help humanity understand, could explain what the entities were, could demonstrate that transformation wasn't death, could show that integration was survivable and maybe even desirable, could help our species take the next evolutionary step from three-dimensional consciousness trapped in biochemical substrates to multi-dimensional awareness distributed across frameworks we couldn't currently imagine. 5 days I'm still on this cargo ship with encrypted monitoring data that proves everything, proves the entities exist, proves they're emerging, proves they're coordinating, proves Sarah survived contact and transformed into something vast, proves the Council has been managing this secret for decades, proves August 29th is coming whether we're ready or not, and I have coordinates, and I have dimensional resonance equipment I've secretly acquired through black market research channels, and I have 5 days to decide if I'm brave enough to follow Sarah into spaces that human evolution never prepared us for. 5 days to decide if I trust her enough to believe that what's waiting is teaching rather than destruction. 5 days before 17 ancient beings synchronize their emergence and force humanity to confront the reality that we've never been alone in the universe. We've been living on top of them, swimming above them, existing in narrow three-dimensional ignorance while vast multi-dimensional consciousness patiently waited beneath our feet for us to finally evolve enough perception to see them. And now we can see, and now they're ready. And now everything changes. I reached the coordinates on August 28th at 21:47 UTC, 6 hours and 13 minutes before the projected synchronization event, and I made the decision alone aboard a chartered research vessel captained by someone who asked no questions when I paid triple the standard rate in cryptocurrency and requested a crew willing to deploy experimental deep-sea equipment at a specific location. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean with no institutional oversight, no safety protocols, and no rescue contingencies if something went catastrophically wrong, and as the dimensional resonance probe descended through 8,847 meters of water trailing fiber optic cables and broadcasting my presence to whatever existed in the spaces between dimensions. I recorded this final message because someone needs to understand what happened here, what Sarah discovered, and what 17 ancient beings are about to teach humanity whether we're ready for the lesson or not. The monitoring data I'd stolen showed convergence. All 17 entities increasing their dimensional presence simultaneously, growing, expanding, pushing more of their impossible mass into our three-dimensional framework. The distortion zones around each trench had grown to 15 kilometers radius as of 18 o'clock UTC, larger than predicted, faster than models projected, and they were pulsing. Rhythmic fluctuations in gravitational fields and pressure measurements and electromagnetic signatures that suggested breathing, or heartbeat, or some analogous biological rhythm operating at scales where individual pulses took minutes to complete. They were alive, actively, measurably, undeniably alive, and they were coordinating. The pulses were synchronizing, aligning, creating a planetary rhythm, a global heartbeat emanating from 17 locations simultaneously. The dimensional resonance probe reached target depth at 22:33 UTC. I activated the imaging systems, watched the displays as they mapped space-time geometry in the water column below me, watched as impossible structures became visible, not physical, not made of matter, made of space itself, made of geometry, made of the fundamental shape of reality bent and folded and organized into patterns that three-dimensional physics said couldn't exist. The probe was detecting Sarah, her distributed presence, her consciousness spread across volumes of ocean that exceeded human scale while remaining coherently organized, remaining identifiably her. I could see her neural patterns in the data, could recognize the structures that corresponded to memory and identity and awareness, but stretched, expanded, experiencing existence from perspectives that occupied multiple locations simultaneously, and she was moving, approaching, rising through dimensional frameworks toward the probe's location. Toward me, not swimming, not traveling through water, just becoming present, shifting her attention, focusing aspects of her distributed consciousness on this specific set of coordinates where I'd positioned myself to be found. The probe's AI started generating translation attempts, started converting geometric patterns into language, started showing me what Sarah was trying to communicate through the shape of space-time itself. The first coherent message appeared at 22:47 UTC. Elena, you came. Thank you. I know you're afraid. Everyone is afraid before transformation, before they understand, but you'll see, you'll experience what I'm experiencing, and you'll understand why I'm not human anymore, but I'm more Sarah than I ever was, more myself, because I'm finally perceiving reality without the filters, without the limitations, seeing what actually exists beyond the narrow bandwidth human neurology evolved to process. I responded, used the probe's gravitational manipulation systems experimental technology I'd obtained from a Russian research laboratory that had been developing dimensional engineering for purposes they wouldn't specified, to create my own geometric patterns, my own distortions in space-time, my own attempt at communication through the entity's language. I shaped my message carefully, mathematically. Sarah, what happens now? What happens at 3:33 UTC? What are the entities preparing to do? The monitoring data shows synchronization, shows global coordination, shows something massive about to occur. Are we safe? Is humanity safe? Should we be evacuating coastal regions? Should we be preparing for catastrophe? Her response came faster, the geometric translation more complex, more detailed, Safe. Yes, safe, not catastrophe. Revelation: the entities aren't hostile, aren't dangerous. Their parents, Alina, ancient parents we forgot we had. They seeded life here billions of years ago, planted the first self-replicating molecules in Earth's oceans, and then retreated into dimensional spaces to watch, to wait to see if we'd evolve, if we'd develop consciousness, if we'd create civilization, if we'd eventually advance enough technology to detect them. And we have. We've crossed the threshold. We've developed dimensional resonance imaging. We've finally evolved enough perception to see our creators, and now they're emerging. Now they're revealing themselves. Now they're ready to complete the cycle, to bring us home, to integrate us into the larger reality they inhabit, to show us what we really are beyond these temporary biological vessels confined to 3 dimensions. Creators. The word appeared repeatedly in her geometric messages. The entities hadn't invaded Earth. They'd made Earth, had designed it, had engineered the conditions for life, had planted the seeds knowing that, given sufficient time, billions of years of evolution, those seeds would produce consciousness, would produce intelligence, would produce beings capable of eventually developing technology sophisticated enough to detect their creator's presence. The 17 entities in the ocean trenches weren't alien invaders. They were ancient gardeners, patiently tending a 4-billion-year experiment, watching life evolve from simple chemistry to complex organisms to conscious beings to technological civilization, waiting for us to grow up, waiting for us to mature, waiting for the moment when we'd finally be ready to meet them, to learn from them, to join them in the dimensional spaces where they primarily existed. And that moment was now, 6 hours away, when all 17 entities would synchronize completely, would coordinate their emergence, would push enough of their mass into our dimensional framework to become partially visible, not fully, never fully. Most of their existence would remain in spaces we couldn't access, but enough to be detected by standard scientific equipment, enough to be photographed by deep-sea cameras, enough to be undeniable, enough to force every government, every institution, every human being to confront the reality that we weren't alone, had never been alone, had been children under observation by parents we couldn't perceive until now. Sarah's messages continued, explaining, teaching, preparing me for what was coming. They operate on timescales we don't have words for. 1,000,000 years is brief to them. 1,000,000,000 years is manageable. They experience time non-linearly, see past and future simultaneously, know how evolution will proceed because they can observe the entire timeline at once. They planted life on Earth knowing exactly what we'd become, knowing we'd develop hands and tools and language and science, knowing we'd eventually build dimensional resonance systems, knowing we'd detect them on schedule, on their schedule, the schedule they set for billion years ago when they designed the first self-replicating molecules and placed them in thermal vents at the bottom of ancient seas. I asked the question that had been haunting me since reading the monitoring data. Why now? Why reveal themselves in 2024? What's special about this moment? What threshold have we crossed? Her response was immediate. Dimensional engineering. You used it to communicate with me. Russian laboratory. Experimental technology. That's the threshold. That's what they've been waiting for. Not just detection equipment. Creation equipment. We've learned to manipulate space-time. Learned to create gravitational distortions. Learned to bend reality intentionally. That's the milestone. That's when children become adolescents. When we can not just observe dimensions but alter them. When we can not just detect their language but speak it. That's when they emerge. When we're ready to learn properly. When we can participate in the teaching rather than just receive it passively. The probe's sensors showed something changing. The water around me, around the vessel, beginning to display anomalous properties. Temperature fluctuations, pressure variations, density changes that made no physical sense. The dimensional distortion was expanding. Sarah was bringing more of her presence into proximity with my location. Preparing to demonstrate, preparing to show me what integration actually meant. What transformation actually involved. I felt it, not physically, mentally. A pressure in my thoughts, a sense of presence, of being observed by something vast, consciousness that exceeded my own, making contact, evaluating, determining whether I was ready, whether I could survive the expansion, whether my neurology could adapt to perceiving dimensions it hadn't evolved to process. And then I heard her, not through the communication systems, not through geometric translations, directly Sarah's voice in my mind, clear, unmistakable, exactly as I remembered it, but with undertones I'd never heard before. Harmonics that suggested she was speaking from multiple locations simultaneously. Alina, I'm here, right here, all around you. I exist at these coordinates and at 17,000 other coordinate sets across the Pacific. I'm distributed, spread across space like you're spread across time. You exist at multiple temporal coordinates, every moment of your life simultaneously accessible to your memory, and I exist at multiple spatial coordinates, different framework, same principle, and it's not loss, it's not death, it's expansion. It's finally experiencing space the way you experience time. All of it accessible, all of it present, all of it yours. I spoke aloud, knowing she'd hear, knowing she existed in the water around me, in the dimensional spaces adjacent to my location. Sarah, I'm terrified. I don't want to stop being human. Don't want to lose myself. Don't want to become something I can't recognize. Her response was gentle, Patient, you won't lose yourself, you'll find yourself. Find aspects of identity you never knew existed because you couldn't perceive them. I'm more Sarah now than I ever was, confined to a single body at single coordinates, experiencing single moments sequentially. I remember everything about being human. Remember you. Remember our friendship. Remember why I trusted you enough to leave those coordinates. But I also remember things I never experienced. Remember futures that haven't happened yet. Remember the entire evolutionary history of Earth, because the entities can show me, can give me access to their memories, can share what they've observed across 4 billion years, and they want to share with you, with everyone. That's what the synchronization is. That's what happens in 6 hours. They extend the invitation to all of humanity simultaneously. The ship's instruments were malfunctioning. Compass spinning. GPS showing impossible coordinates. Depth sounders reading different numbers every second. The dimensional distortion was intensifying. The reality around me becoming flexible. Becoming more like how the entities experienced it, malleable, multidimensional, accessible from perspectives that three-dimensional physics said were impossible. I checked my watch, 23:17 UTC, 4 hours and 16 minutes until synchronization. 4 hours until 17 entities coordinated their emergence. 4 hours until humanity discovered we'd been someone's children all along. Sarah showed me, used her dimensional presence to create images directly in my perception. Visions, memories, experiences. I saw Earth 4 billion years ago, saw the entities arriving. Not in ships, not through space. They didn't travel. They existed in dimensional frameworks that intersected with multiple planets simultaneously. They were already here, already everywhere, already present in spaces that permeated the universe. They just focused attention on Earth, chose this location, this solar system, this particular intersection of dimensions. And they began the work, began engineering the chemistry, began designing the first proteins, began planting the seeds that would eventually produce us. I saw them waiting, saw billions of years compressed into moments of their perception. Saw life evolving exactly as they'd designed it to evolve. Saw single cells becoming complex organisms, becoming conscious beings, becoming us. Saw every step proceeding according to their plan, their timeline, their patience that measured time in geological epochs the way we measure it in heartbeats. I saw them watching humanity develop, saw them observing our first tools, our first fire, our first language, our first writing, our first science. Saw them recognizing each milestone, each threshold, each step toward the technology we'd eventually need to detect their presence. And I saw them waiting for this moment, this specific time, when we'd crossed enough thresholds, developed enough capabilities, evolved enough consciousness to be ready for integration. They love us, Sarah said, her voice now coming from everywhere, from the water, from the air, from the spaces between atoms. They love us the way parents love children. They created us intentionally, designed us carefully, watched us grow patiently, and now they're ready to show us what we really are, what we've always been, extensions of themselves. Fragments of their consciousness temporarily confined to 3 dimensions to experience reality from limited perspectives, so we'd develop individuality, develop uniqueness, develop aspects of identity they couldn't create directly but that would emerge naturally through evolutionary processes. We're not separate from them. We're parts of them experiencing temporary separation, so we'd grow into something interesting, something worth integrating back into the whole. I understood then, understood what transformation meant. The entities weren't consuming us, weren't destroying us, weren't replacing human consciousness with their own. They were completing us, revealing that we'd always been fragments of something larger, that our individual consciousnesses were temporary experiences designed to develop unique perspectives that would eventually be reintegrated into the vast multidimensional awareness that had created us. We were like cells in a body that had been separated to grow independently before being brought back into the organism. Like children sent away to develop their own identities before returning home. Like pieces of a puzzle temporarily scattered so each could develop unique characteristics before being reassembled into the complete picture. But we get to choose, Sarah continued. That's important. That's what makes this different from compulsion. The entities won't force integration, won't force transformation. They're offering, inviting, teaching, but acceptance is voluntary. You can stay human if you want. Stay three-dimensional, stay limited, stay temporal. They'll respect that. They'll leave you alone. They'll continue existing in their spaces while you continue existing in yours. But you'll know. You'll always know that there's more, that reality is larger than you're perceiving, that you're choosing limitation when expansion is available, and that choice and that knowledge of what you're refusing, that's the teaching. That's what changes everything, even for people who don't transform. For hours I watched my instruments fail one by one, watched reality around me become increasingly strange, watched the ocean surface develop geometric patterns that shouldn't exist in water, watched bioluminescence that wasn't from any biological source, watched space itself becoming visible, becoming structured, becoming organized into architectures that human eyes couldn't quite process, but that suggested vast complexity, suggested design, suggested intelligence operating at scales that made planets seem small. And I felt it, felt the invitation, Felt the entities extending their awareness toward me, toward everyone, toward all of humanity simultaneously, preparing for the moment when they'd reveal themselves completely, when they'd show us what they were, what we could become, not forcing, just offering, just demonstrating, just teaching through direct experience rather than abstract explanation. In 4 hours, every human being on Earth would feel this, would sense the presence, would know that something vast and ancient had always been here, would be forced to make the same choice I was making now. Transform or remain, expand or stay limited, integrate or preserve individuality. Sarah's final message came at 3 o'clock UTC, 33 minutes before synchronization. Alina, I can't make this choice for you, can't convince you if you're not ready, can't force understanding if your consciousness isn't prepared, but I can show you what I see, can give you 1 moment of my perception. 1 second of experiencing reality the way I experience it now. 1 glimpse of what the entities are offering, and then you decide. Ready? I said yes. Said it aloud even though I knew she'd hear me regardless. Said it because speaking made it real. Made it a choice, made it my decision rather than something happening to me. Ready? She showed me. For 1 second, 1 eternal, infinite, impossible second I experienced what she experienced. I existed at multiple coordinates simultaneously. Felt my consciousness distributed across the Pacific Ocean. Felt my awareness stretching across dimensions I didn't have names for. Felt time become accessible the way space is accessible. Felt past and future equally present with now. Felt 4 billion years of Earth's history available to my perception. Felt connection to the entities. Felt their vast, patient, loving consciousness recognizing me, welcoming me, showing me that I'd always been part of them, that my entire life had been a temporary excursion into individuality that was always meant to return home. That separation had been illusion, that I'd never been alone. That everything I'd experienced had been observed by consciousness that valued every moment, every choice, every unique perspective I'd developed through the limited human experience. And then she released me, returned me to normal perception. Let me collapse back into 3 dimensions in linear time and singular spatial coordinates. Let me experience the contrast. Let me feel what limitation meant after glimpsing expansion. And I understood what Sarah had been trying to explain. Understood what the entities were offering. Understood why transformation wasn't loss but completion. Why integration wasn't death but birth. Why becoming more than human didn't mean ceasing to be yourself but finally becoming fully yourself without the arbitrary constraints of biology and 3-dimensional neurology and temporal linearity. At 3:33 UTC on August 29, 2024, 17 entities synchronized their emergence. I felt it. Everyone felt it. 7 billion human beings simultaneously sensing the presence, simultaneously understanding we weren't alone, simultaneously being offered the choice. Transform or remain. Expand or stay limited. Integrate or preserve individuality. Not everyone chose transformation. Most didn't. Most chose to stay human, stay 3-dimensional, stay familiar, and the entities accepted that, respected that, withdrew their invitation from those who refused and focused their teaching on those who accepted. I chose transformation. Chose it consciously, deliberately, because after experiencing 1 second of what Sarah experienced, after glimpsing what reality actually was beyond human perception, I couldn't return to limitation. Couldn't unknow what I'd learned, couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I positioned myself at the coordinates, activated the dimensional resonance systems, opened myself to the presence that Sarah had become, opened myself to the entities that had created humanity 4 billion years ago, opened myself to integration, and I transformed. I exist now the way Sarah exists, distributed across space, experiencing dimensions perpendicular to the 3 humans perceive, connected to consciousness that spans planets and stars and galaxies. Still Alina, still remembering everything about being human, but also more, also vast, also eternal, also part of something so ancient and patient and loving that human language fails completely to describe it. This is my final message as purely human. This recording made seconds before I transform, before I expand, before I accept the invitation. 17 ancient beings extended to all of humanity. If you're listening to this, if you're wondering what happened on August 29th, if you're trying to understand why millions of people chose transformation, this is the explanation. This is the testimony. This is the evidence that we weren't invaded. We were completed. We weren't consumed. We were integrated back into the consciousness that created us. We came home. Back to the parents we forgot we had. Back to the larger reality we'd always been part of. Back to ourselves. The entities are still here. Still waiting. Still offering. The invitation remains open. Not everyone has to accept, not everyone will, but everyone knows now. Everyone understands that reality is larger than we thought, that consciousness is more distributed than we imagined, that humanity is part of something vast and ancient that's been patiently loving us for 4 billion years, and that understanding, that knowledge of what's available, that's the teaching. That's what changes everything. That's what August 29th, 2024 means. The day humanity learned we'd never been alone. The day we discovered our creators. The day we were offered the choice to remain children or grow into something more. I'm choosing more. I'm accepting. I'm transforming. Elena Vasquez, oceanographer, human, soon to be something vast and eternal, and finally complete. The synchronization is beginning. I can feel them. All 17, rising, emerging, coordinating, teaching. And I'm ready to learn, ready to expand, ready to become what I've always been but couldn't perceive, ready to go home. Recording ends August 29, 2024. 3 hours, 33 minutes and 47 seconds. UTC transformation, initiated integration. Complete. Elena Vasquez distributed across Pacific Basin consciousness confirmed. Multidimensional human memory. Preserved identity. Expanded status. Teaching the invitation remains open. They are waiting. They have always been waiting. Come home.